All right, so here's my drawing. So this is my contour line drawing. It's just the line. And you're going to work on shading. And after you draw it out, try to fill up the whole page, you're going to work on your shading. So really pay attention to what part of the shoe's dark, what part of the shoe's lighter, but you're still going to have different values in there. So shading is when you're going from dark to light with your pencil. So obviously this part of my shoe is black. I'm not going to shade that in black because the pencil is actually gray. But I am going to start shading. That's going to be my darkest value in my drawing. And your foot or your shoe is going to be brown. So I'm actually going to put more of a shadow here to give it that round effect. All right, and then in here where it's supposed to be, it's a little bit darker because it's kind of inside the shoe. So I'll make sure to shade that a little bit darker. I'm just going back and forth between places so you can see the different values I'm using. I'm not going to make you watch me shade the whole thing. And then even though this part of my shoe is white, or it was white when it was new, now it's kind of dirty, but you're gonna do a little bit of shading even if something's white, because that's what makes it look three-dimensional. So maybe around the bottom of the shoe, because you want kind of a shadow, and it gets lighter. It just depends on the color of your shoe. So, and my laces are kind of pink, so that's in between. If you think about the lightness or darkness of a color, that's kind of in between black and white. So I would do a medium gray, but maybe where my laces overlap, I'm just going to put a little bit of shadows. And then inside my shoe, is probably going to be one of your darkest values because that's inside the shoe. It's not getting a lot of light. Now, I didn't do a lot of details yet on my shoe. I didn't include like the textures of the laces or the texture on this part. I'm going to wait till after I shade to do that because it's really hard to shade if you do those tiny details because you're going to smudge it. Or I'm going to add the stitching after that, okay? So first day you should draw your shoe, and then second day probably working on the shading. It might take you a little bit extra time, but I'll give you some extra time on when I come back, okay? But this is just something fun for you to do. I'm going to work on this a little bit more and show you in a second, okay? So I've got most of my shading done. I'm going to go back and make some areas darker where I feel like they need to be darker. Just do a little bit of cross hatching. And you really want to look at the shoe you're drawing and pay attention to those values. And once you get all the shading done, you can go and start adding those final details like stitching and textures. So I might try to add that texture on the end of my shoe. It's got a little bit of a cross texture. Maybe some of the stitching to give it a little bit more realistic look. Okay. And then maybe a little bit of texture on the laces. All right, depends on how you want it to look.